There's another alternative syntax which I want to show you that's related to how you listen to changes. Thus far, we always use provider off, and to be honest, that's the most common way of doing it. But there's another way which is totally equal, which you could also use. You could also wrap the parts of your widget tree that are interested in an update into a new widget. And that widget would be the consumer widget. Now, for a consumer to be available, you need to import your provider package because that is provided by the provider package. And consumer then actually does not take just a child, but actually a builder, and you have to provide a builder. Now that builder takes a context, then something dynamic, and then a widget. Now what's that? Now first of all, you have to know that consumer is a generic type, and of course you should provide or mention which type of data you want to consume. And then this is pretty equal to provider of. So this establishes the connection to your provided data, and it looks for the nearest provider of that type up in the widget tree. This builder then receives a context, it receives an instance, or the nearest instance it found of that data, so our product here, and then it receives a child. Now, let's worry about the child a second. Let's first of all focus on what it should return, and there, it should of course return what you returned before. So here I'll cut all of that, get rid of this child here for the moment, and simply return in the builder this widget tree, which depends on our provided data. So now we can comment out this provider off thing up there, and we're setting up a listener here with consumer. If you do a full refresh now, you see I can still click these hearts and have the same behavior as before. Now, why would we use this approach then? Well, generally it's exactly the same, so it's up to you, but it can have a couple of advantages depending on how you use it. When you use provider off, then the whole build method will rerun whenever that data changes. Now with clever widget splitting, you can split your widgets such that this isn't a problem because you want to run the entire build method when something changes. But you could also have a case where you only want to run a subpart of your widgets tree when some data changes. And then you could only wrap the subpart of the widget tree that depends on your product data with that listener. That would be an option. And even here, for example, you could get your product here with listen false to get all that one-time data which you don't expect to change, like the title or the image URL. And you could then use consumer, not up here, but down there around your favorite button to wrap only that with that consumer, because that's the only place in this widget which really does change when our product changes. So just to demonstrate this, we could get our product here with listen false, and then we use consumer product here, cut this, and here still return clip rect, and only wrap our leading icon button here with this consumer. Now, of course, make sure you manage your parentheses correctly, remove one at the end, and wrap the icon button in one more. And now what I achieved here is I have that general product, which I'm extracting from my provided product, but I don't listen to updates there. I need that general product because I'm getting the ID from there, the image URL, and the title. But then I have this part of my widget tree down there, which actually also listens to my nearest product, but here I am interested in changes, and consumer always listens to changes here. And I then rebuild the icon button whenever my product changes. So I shrink the area of the widget which reruns when my product changes. And to prove that, let me throw a little print statement in here. Product rebuilds. And we should see that this now doesn't run when my heart here is clicked. So it runs initially here. And now if I clear that and I press the heart, you see it doesn't run. And that would change if I don't set this here to false, of course. If I, just to prove this, do this real quick. Now if I press the heart, you of course see product rebuilds there as well. So that's a tiny improvement we can actually implement here, because consumer allows us to, since it's a widget, throw it somewhere into our widget tree and then only rebuild the nested children. Since This here is not a widget, but simply a method or a way of extracting data and storing it in a variable. It always triggers the whole build method. Again, you could achieve something similar to having a consumer down there by splitting your widgets in an efficient way. For example, we could have outsourced the icon button here into a separate widget, then used provider auth in there with listen to true, or not defined at all since true is the default, and we would have a similar setup. But this here is another way where you can easily control a part of your widget tree and make it a listener, whereas the majority of the tree is not a listener. Now, what's up with that child you're getting here as a third argument? If you have parts in your widget tree, which then does update, which you don't actually want to rebuild when it generally rebuilds this, then on the consumer, as an argument, you can pass in a child, and that could be some data like a text widget, which never changes, which doesn't depend on the data you're generally listening to. And this child you're defining here, which can also be a more complex widget tree or a custom widget, of course, is then ending up here in this child argument, which is passed into this builder function, and you can then reference it in there. Now here, I don't need it because all my parts here in the end are dynamic. But if you had something else here, like a label, which the icon button doesn't have, but if it would have a label, and that should be your text widget there, which shouldn't rebuild just because product changed, then you could refer to your child argument here, and this child argument up there would refer to the value you stored here, and it wouldn't rebuild when your consumer generally does rebuild its builder widget here or its builder function. So it can be a tiny optimization if in this part, which generally should update, you still have parts that shouldn't update. It's a bit more advanced, we don't need it here, hence I'll add a underscore. The core takeaway here really is that consumer can be used to only rebuild parts of the widget tree instead of the entire widget tree. Again, something you could have also achieved with clever widget splitting and only provider auth. But it's up to you what you use, and there generally is no better or worse option.